McDowell County, West Virginia, in the eastern United States, in 2006 was the 5th poorest county in the United States of America. There are over 3,000 counties in the United States. And I thought I would begin, given the advice of the wonderful students that have organized this conference, with something more personal. I had been drifting away from that direction until they reminded me in the last few days. And I'd like to share with you something I wrote about 10 years ago. I was then the upper school director of Berwick Academy in South Berwick, Maine, a K-12 school, not unlike the International School of Panama and similar in size. And Bill Clapp, who was the math department chair, lacrosse coach, and a wilderness educator, and I went to McDowell County with 9 high school students. Yeah, some of you have probably read The Rocket Boys or seen the movie October Sky. Homer Hickam, he's from McDowell County, went on to work at NASA. It's a really amazing place. Let me share this with you. It's about 3 in the afternoon on the first day of spring break, Saturday, March 11th, 2006. Bill Clapp and I are in the front seats of a 12-passenger van on Route 52, a winding old 2-lane road in the southern part of West Virginia between the towns of Bluefield and Welch. After driving 3 hours from the airport in Raleigh, North Carolina, we are now in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. We're now coming into the heart of Appalachia. There are 9 high school students sitting in 3 rows of seats behind us. But you wouldn't know it without turning around to check. We've been listening to music and talking and telling stories and laughing for 200 miles. Now the radio is off and no one says a word. It will be this way for close to 30 uncomfortable minutes. Absolute silence. Everyone is looking out the windows of the van, left side and right side. It's as if we are watching an IMAX documentary on poverty. Small houses, mountains rising up behind them, dot both sides of the road. Some of the homes have extensive fire damage. Some appear to have been flooded out numerous times. Others are simply falling down, dilapidated, crumbling, and unsafe. Yards are filled with old appliances, automobile parts, and trash. And our students sitting behind us are not only coming to grips with how awful all of this is, but they're also beginning to realize that people are living in these houses. Though some of the homes are completely destroyed and deserted, the majority are occupied. We see the little kids, the babies, the teenagers, the moms, the elderly, on the porches, in the yards, walking along the sides of the road. No one in the van has any idea what to say. I've been to Appalachia before. This is what I was expecting. I am happy that we are seeing all this in the light of day. I am proud of our students for the way they are taking all of this in, quietly and uncomfortably. I love them for it, and I am certain that our 5 days in Appalachia together will be good ones. After a week of service there, we came back to continue with what I wrote. I asked our 9 students, Rachel, Charlie, Katie, Hannah, Xander, Megan, Shelby, Meg, and Christian, to write about the trip. I asked for 1 to 2 short paragraphs in response to 5 key questions about a 2-page assignment. Extracurricular, ungraded, not required. Most of the students wrote 4 to 5 pages. 1 wrote 10 pages. They wrote from their hearts about despair, responsibility, love, and community, and from their heads about politics and economics and power and justice. They wrote about how the trip changed them and about wanting to go back. And lastly, at the end of this article, and this was written for the community at Berwick Academy, much like we write here at ISP for our parents and families, arguably, the 2 most pure, most sacred, authentic, beautiful human motivations are curiosity and love. Imagine if high school students were driven to learn solely by their innate sense of curiosity and essentially nothing else. Imagine if all of us in our day-to-day endeavors, family, school, work, were always guided by love and essentially nothing else. Surely it has to be in the pureness and simplicity of these 2 motivations that education is most transformative. I wrote that 10 years ago. For the better part of the last 20 plus years, I have worked in a high school. As a teacher, as a principal, and I consider it a great privilege and honor to be a principal of this school, as a college counselor, as an advisor, as a coach. I've talked to kids, I've talked to parents, I've talked to teachers, I've observed what happens in classrooms, I've guided what happens in classrooms. I've read all the research, I've studied education and organizational leadership and management at University of Washington, at the University of New Hampshire, and at Harvard. I've read everything I can, all the way back to Socrates and Plato, Jean Piaget, John Dewey, Diane Ravitch, Deb Meyer. I have been paying attention. I have been focused on high school and what it is for quite some time. I say that because I desperately hope you will consider what I have to say. And as a disclaimer, I am not selling a book. There is no website I'm sending to you. There is no software program. I am not running for an office of any sort. Back in my home country of the United States, I am neither registered in the Democratic or Republican Party. I'm proudly unaffiliated. I vote every chance that I have. So please consider what I have to say. What I believe is that depth, compassion, and ideation are absolutely core, all three necessary, and arguably the three sufficient to transforming secondary education as we know it. And although I've mostly studied the system in the United States, most of what we do around the world, and I've visited many schools within the US and outside, are following a similar model. These are the keys to transforming it, and it needs to be transformed critically. And I believe, slightly biased as a high school educator, that it's core at a time when young people go from being kids to young adults, that we have to get this right. We absolutely, positively have to. The current model of secondary education, the one that we use at ISP, the one that almost all schools in the United States use and almost all schools throughout the world use, is over 100 years old. It was designed in various places and various times, but in the United States, it was designed for efficiency and for scale at a time when we knew almost nothing about how the brain works or about teaching and learning. That is a fact. What educators and politicians and others will argue about is whether or not it's still a good system. I, sadly enough, believe it's a horrible system. And what I find incredibly inspiring is the tremendous things that happen at this high school and high schools over the world, despite the structure, because of dedicated kids and supportive parents and phenomenal teachers that are accomplishing great things despite the way we have this structured. Some of you have heard this before, that the model needs to change, that the model is old. A lot of speakers, a lot that is written glosses right over what we mean by that. I want to take just a minute before we talk about depth, before we talk about compassion and ideation, to explain quickly what I mean by this model is old and the structure has changed very little in the last 100 years. Quickly, and this is an hour or two in and of itself, but I just want you thinking about this if you aren't already, please. Curriculum is currently organized by disciplines. Duh. It shouldn't be. That's a convenient way to organize knowledge. It has nothing to do with learning. Curriculum should be organized around questions and problems, interdisciplinary, like the real world. The second critical flaw with curriculum is we are trying to do ridiculously too much in high school. Some of you heard it said before that law school is not about learning the law, it's about learning to think like a lawyer, because you can't learn all the law in 3 years. I would argue that in high school, probably by a factor of 2, we are trying to do too much in history, in world history, in Panamanian history, in biology, in chemistry, in the books we read. We could cut it all in half to get at depth. Secondly, instruction. The model that most of us know in this world, and I'll talk about this in another minute or two, is a model about delivery, about a teacher delivering information and skills to his or her students. That model's okay, but it's not enough. What we need more of in the mix is basically young people figuring things out for themselves, guided by teachers. You could call it constructivism. I'm going to call it ideation today. but I'll explain that a little bit further. Our assessment systems are designed to rank kids and slap labels on them, and mostly serves the college admissions process and is not reliably and validly connected to learning. What we need is a system, and we think about it, a 0 to 100 scale, and sometimes we include a decimal point, sometimes 2. Do you realize with 2 decimal points attached to a 0 to 100 grading scale, that gives you 10,000 points. That gives you 5,000, that gives you 5,999 ways to fail, or 1,000 ways to get an A. It is neither valid nor reliable nor connected directly to learning. We need simpler assessment systems as a must. Not surprisingly, but unfortunately, teacher training prepares teachers to do all of those things I just outlined that are part of the current or the old system. And it's hard for the experts in the field of teacher training to talk about changing what we do in terms of training teachers until those schools exist. And it's hard for those schools to exist that we need until we think about training teachers differently. We need to do both in partnership. How we use time. In schools today, 90% of schools, high schools around the planet, time is inflexible and it's a constant. And if time is inflexible and a constant, for example, 4 years to graduate from high school, the variable becomes learning. If we are serious that a high school diploma means something and that students can demonstrate a certain set of skills that are core, it is ludicrous to think, we have 340 students here at ISP, they're all going to get there in exactly 4 years? That it takes a semester, that it takes a school year, that earning what we need to do, we need to think much more flexibly about time. High school was designed physically, oftentimes on the outskirts of town, the way the schedule operates, to be somewhat of an isolated, you do what you do here in high school and very little connection to the real world. We've been working really hard for years at trying to better connect what happens in schools with what happens in the real world and to bring the real world into the school in many different ways. But we need a system and a structure that supports and cultivates it rather than a system and a structure that makes it difficult. And lastly, many of you have probably heard this said before, that in schools today, we are preparing young people for jobs that don't yet exist. Research on the brain these days, week to week, phenomenal about how teaching and learning works. The study of learning differences and learning disabilities. The economic needs, what's happening with colleges. If there was ever an organization on this planet that needed to be responsive and flexible and entrepreneurial, it's a high school. If you go around and poll 500 people over the next month or so and ask them to name entrepreneurial, flexible, responsible organizations, high school is not going to be on the list. Bureaucratic, slow, unresponsive is how it's always been, and that needs to change desperately. That's a very quick overview of kind of what we're talking about here, but I would suggest, what I believe, is that by tackling these next 3 ideas, and if we focus on depth, and if we focus on compassion, and we focus on ideation, we can change, we can drive, we can force change, we can make change. All of this can look a lot different. Ideation is a basic idea. It's about having ideas, pursuing them, developing them, seeing them through to actualization, looking at a problem, looking at a need, looking at a question, tackling it, inventing something, composing something, creating something. It might be private enterprise, it might be for an NGO or address a social issue. It's about figuring things out. It's always integrated and interdisciplinary, at least almost always integrated and interdisciplinary. It is, in my opinion, the most critical shift that needs to happen in schools, that the design and the structure is more supportive of this. And there is a lot of energy around it. But there's been a lot of energy around a lot of good things in high school for years, and not all of them are happening. This one is key. 2 critical pieces here to making this happen. One I alluded to a minute ago, the instructional shift. Instruction in high school is about teachers teaching, right? What else could it be? It's a delivery model. It's an efficient model. I'll give you an example. There's a wonderful book by Eleanor Duckworth called The Having of Wonderful Ideas. was written probably about 40 years ago. The tides. Here in Panama City, the tides are pretty significant because of the lack of slope coming into the coastline. One way to teach young people how the tides work, which is the prevailing normal way to do it, is high quality, direct instruction delivery. I'll probably begin this lesson with an explanation of how the tides work. The moon, the sun, gravity, force on the ocean, the force on the water, and the rotation of the earth. And then we'll work on it. We'll look at some videos. We'll have some group discussion. I'll have some manipulatives of the earth, of the moon, of the sun, how they come together. We'll talk. We'll answer questions. I'll have students come up and kind of present key concepts. It's what a lot of us would think of as exactly what a powerful lesson should be. And it's an okay way to teach. Sometimes it's an essential way to teach. And that's overwhelmingly what we do in high school, and we strive to do well. The alternative, and it happens in pockets, is I don't begin the lesson with "this is how the tides work." We begin the lesson with "how do the tides work?" And through the manipulatives and the context, we begin to struggle with that. And the students begin to struggle with that. They might theorize that it has something to do with traffic on the Corridor Sur. And it seems to be out in the morning. And over the course of weeks, they begin to observe. They begin to look at things. They begin to practice the skill of figuring things out. This is not easy for teachers. This is not stand back and, "Hey guys, figure out how the tides work. I'll be back in a few weeks." It is harder. It is harder than a well-delivered, simple, direct instruction lesson. And over the course of a much greater amount of time, the students figure out how the tides work. They try, they fail, they explore, they pursue different ideas, and they eventually figure it out. Guided, supported, coached by a teacher, who at times will step in and do some direct delivery instruction. Let's talk about gravity and why the force of gravity of the moon and the sun's got more force than the moon, but the moon's closer, and we'll figure those things out. Why is this so important? Well, it's a better way to learn. And you learn it better when you figure it out for yourselves. It's got an advantage. But it's also more time consuming. And arguably it wouldn't be worthwhile if it weren't for the second reason, which is the first way taught you how the tides work and you learned it. The second way taught you how the tides work, but it taught you how to figure things out, how to solve problems, how to not give up and say, "We haven't been there yet, we haven't covered that yet, I don't know what to do next." It got at the core of what we need in this day and age. It's actually what we needed 100 years ago and 500 years ago and 1,000 years ago, and we're going to need it 1,000 years from now. This is not novel. This is not 21st century. This is not something special happened 15 years ago and we're in a new century, so we need... This is always what made the most sense. It's just that our lousy model was tolerable and more sufficient in a different time. It's no longer tolerable or sufficient. The second critical piece with ideation 2 is we need, as alluded to earlier, is we basically need to organize the curriculum around questions and problems, because all the fascinating stuff is interdisciplinary. It's interdisciplinary in the real world. It's interdisciplinary in kindergarten. It's interdisciplinary in second grade. It's interdisciplinary in doctoral programs. High school, for the matter of efficiency, is where we get the most off course, and that needs to change. One of the other big results in a school that's focused on ideation and invention is it changes the entire culture of the school, the whole feel of the place. What the average high school student on this planet feels on occasion, they will feel regularly, absolutely regularly. This is a huge priority. I think the most important piece of what is up here is to make this shift. Kids figuring things out, inventing things, making things is what we need to work more at. Depth. This one's a little bit simpler and a little bit easier, but it's missing. Depth is about doing things well. That's easy enough, right? It's about quality. What is quality and pursuing quality? It's about mastery. Daniel Pink. I don't know how many folks read Daniel Pink's book, came out in 2009. The Surprising Truth About What Motivates People. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Rather eloquently, it all connects with high school, but mastery is what we're focused on here. Doing things well. It's the kind of thing that a high school student, for example, involved in the Beauty and the Beast, a lot of kids just felt this over the last few days here at ISP. But it needs to be a regular part of what we do. Not getting things done, but doing them with quality and mastery is the key. Today, in high schools, students study 7 or 8 or sometimes 9 subjects at a time. They may be involved in 2 or 3 extracurriculars at a time, possibly things outside of school as well. Homework is typically 20 minutes of this, 30 minutes of that, get it done, get it done, get it done, go to bed at 1:15, be happy that it's finished. IB courses that have wonderful assessment tools also require teachers, for example in biology, to cover a whole lot of content just to make sure we get to that assessment tool. We're doing a lot at a high speed, and we're taking a lot of courses at the same time. We keep pushing mathematics down further and further and further. Quicker, get it done sooner. I'm worried at the expense of kids understanding the basic math and the fractions and the computation skills and the algebra that most of us need in life. Many of us need and want to go further, but we shouldn't be pushing everybody in that direction at a pace that takes away depth and quality and mastery. What high school should be is studying 3 or 4 or 5 things at a time. Homework should be 1 or 2 things. Go to bed by 11 and feel like, wow, I actually have a better understanding of the oncology of how a cancer spells for my biology class. I didn't just get it done, I learned something. I worked on it because I wanted to make sense out of it. And probably half the content. And although that sounds frightening, well, we got to teach chapter 17 in physics. If you're going to do 31 chapters of a physics textbook, nobody's learning it anyways. They're going to pass the test, and a year later, most of it's forgotten. So get down to what's core and focus on that. Compassion. This is a work in progress for me. Maybe a year from now it'll be love instead of compassion. I've understood this for a while, and I'm still struggling with articulating how it plays out in a school. But what I know from my heart, and if that's okay, I'll speak to you from my heart, this is core. We have to get over the hump that compassion and love are some things that happen in little doses in schools, maybe more in church and family and other places. Young people spend a lot of time in high school. We talk about a lot of hard things. We tackle a lot of hard things. We should be tackling more hard things. We need to understand that compassion and love and caring for one another and caring for the world are absolutely critical. I believe that our ability to feel pain and sadness and the depth of that is probably directly proportional to our ability to feel happiness. I believe it is essential to tackle the difficult things. And if we are, then we have to make sure our young people are being prepared with the skills and the knowledge and the understanding and the ideation and the ability to figure things out so they can feel it, but then also have hope because they're getting a phenomenal education that is preparing them to identify things and they can make a difference in this world. It raises the stakes. It's easier to stay away from this stuff and not feel obligated to then give the skills that give the kids the hope to do things differently as we move forward. Structurally, it's just about leaders and teachers being good role models and tackling what is difficult and having an openness to being talking about what is difficult. But more to the point, I believe, because I have tremendous faith in human nature, that it's really a matter of reducing distances and creating time. I believe that if we better connect young people to what is hard in this world, not just through literature, but through distance learning and other technologies, and by spending more time outside of the school and apprenticeships and internships, by having more people in the school, by spending more than 7 minutes at a flag assembly 2 days after the terrorist attacks in Paris and 3 days after the terrorist attacks in Beirut and a week before the terrorist attacks in Africa, that young people will better connect and better understand. And although I've really come to appreciate the power of social media, you can't put red, white, and blue French colors over your Facebook page photo, tweet a few things, share a few things, and be done with it. It's a good start, But if we can bridge these distances and make a more deliberate effort of connecting young people with what is difficult and support them and coach them and facilitate them and give them a really powerful education so they can do really powerful stuff, I have tremendous faith in what is possible. Last slide. I am worried that if we don't get at this issue of a model of secondary education that is beyond outdated, Bill Gates several years ago called it obsolete. He was wrong, because that implies that it one time made sense. It never made sense. It was all about, it's been always about efficiency and about scale. And these systems were created before we knew what teaching and learning was and before we lived in the world that we live in today. All these shifting paradigms that we're talking about today, this is the one education, and secondary education in particular, that hasn't shifted much at all. If we can wholeheartedly commit to bringing depth to high school, bringing compassion to high school, and bringing ideation to high school, kids figuring things out, exploring and inventing, I believe we will change the system, and I believe we will have to change the system, because it's no longer enough for some kids to pull out of the system what they can. All kids need more. And we will have high school graduates that quite simply are smart, and by smart, I mean they can figure things out. They can persist, they're resilient, they have grit, they solve problems, they identify problems, they frame interesting questions. And secondarily, you add to that they know what it means to do something well. Don't do 27 things and check them off. Do 3. And pursue quality. Pursue mastery. That's what it has to be about. And if you had both of those things and nothing more, what you're missing is caring. And yes, that's bigger than high school, but high school is a great place to cultivate and breed and support young people that have compassion, care about the planet, go beyond their immediate family and their neighborhoods to kind of feel a better connection and to explore it. I am very hopeful for the future, given the young people that are participating in this conference today. Some of them I've had a chance to talk to and hear speak already. The high school students that organize this conference. Because I work in a high school, I am tremendously hopeful. But I have to tell you, movement in making these changes happen has been slow. It's political, it's complicated. And if you aren't already engaged in this, whether you're one day going to be a high school student, or you are a high school student, or you're a parent of a high school student, or you're a grandparent of a high school student, or you simply get that getting this right matters to the future of this planet, I beg of you to engage and participate and help. I'm going to finish with a quote from The Little Prince. And I know everybody loves that it is only with the heart that one can see rightly what is essential is invisible to the eye. But there's so much more in this book. And it's the second to last paragraph that is the beauty of it, the absolute beauty of it. And if you know this story, I hope you appreciate this. If you don't know the story, you need to read this book within the next 24 hours. Because a lot of what I just said is in this book. A lot of it is also in Robert Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is 500 pages of figuring out what quality is. And I forgot to share that quote with you. Second to last paragraph, look up at the sky. No, I can't read it. Ask yourselves, is it yes or no? Has the sheep eaten the flour? And you will see how everything changes. Thank you for listening.